'Tis I, your old pal King Chuck, and this is the Sunday Sermon on the Chuck 69 podcast. Yes, indeed. And let's turn our pages now to Austin 3:16 because I'm going to whip somebody's ass. But we also need to give props to one of the greatest human beings to ever walk God's green earth. I want to tell you a little story. So, when I was a little boy, 11 days before my 12th birthday, and this is May 18th, 1993, my mom came home from work late one night, and she had a little convoy of vehicles behind her. One of the vehicles had her future husband and a man that she was dating while my parents were still married. And the other was this ugly, fat blob that I tried to avoid, named Susan Herzog Summers. Susan was one of the, she ran the local Shell Mini Mart in Elk Rapids, Michigan, back in the 80s and 90s, and she was a very she was a two-faced person. On the outside, she was a local, she was a friend to everybody. She was she dressed up like a clown at Harbor Days, the local festival in town, which is kind of ironic because she didn't even like kids, and she really didn't like me. So the story kind of goes like this. My mom was not happy in their marriage, and she announced that she announced that she was going to leave my dad and take me with her to live with Susan. And at the time, I was very upset for many reasons, and one of them was the fact that I made a pledge to myself to avoid all fat girls. And I know this was going back to 11 years old. So the story was there was a girl at my school named Wendy who everybody did not like at all. She had a really bad flatulence problem. She farted around everybody. She smelled horrible. And one time she rode my bus, and my dad was a bus driver for Elk Rapids schools, and he would come to the back. So let me tell you what happened. She sat next to me on the bus because I had the last empty seat, and the whole bus looked at me, and I was humiliated. I started to cry because one of the running jokes for a lot of people was that I was Wendy's boyfriend, which was not true. And I was going to prove to everybody when I got older I would get married to the right woman and have the happy life that I wanted, that I couldn't get as a young boy. Well, unfortunately, that never happened. And the reason being was because, it kind of started with my mom saying, "Too bad, you're going to be living with Susan from now on." And my mom, and I didn't like Susan, and Susan didn't like me. And not only that, the longer I stayed at Susan's house, the more I realized that she was a disgusting cunt. And even today, I hear bad things about her. Like, she referred to Martin Luther King Day as the old N-word's birthday. And the worst of it all was that she was a prostitute. So Susan's story was that she had major credit card problems. She was she probably made only $8 an hour at the Shell station. And here she is living in this ginormous, yeah, it was a good sized home, but she was only renting. And she used the whole house, and she came to the realization that she needed roommates. So behind my dad and I's back, my mom helped to clean out the old, the upper flat. And anyway, what happened was, despite all the hard work they put in to clean up the place, the kitchen didn't work. My mom had to get a hot plate so we could have dinner. And worst of all, it didn't even have heat. And one of the things that my mom blamed the demise of the marriage on was the fact that my dad, when the furnace stopped working many years ago, instead of buying a new furnace, which the house needed, my dad decided, okay, we're going to use the wood stove from now on. And there would be a giant pile of wood in the backyard that we would have to take in all the time. And, it was like, anyway, and what was kind of hypocritical was now we didn't have heat, period. And because the house was 100 years old and was built during olden times. So, long story short, my mom tried her best to make me happy. And, here's another thing too about Susan. So I told you that she was a prostitute, And I should tell you that one of the reasons why my mom left Susan finally was because she got, she found out that she could get a house from the government through a FHA loan. And that's what we did. My mom made so little money that she was eligible and bought a house. So, and Susan's problem, the part of it too, was that my mom had to get away from Susan. Susan had a major issue, and that issue was because she was a prostitute, she had to buy lots of lingerie, and she would come up into our apartment wearing, dressed like a whore, basically. And she was a woman who weighed like 350 pounds at least. She was like 6 foot tall. She was built like a barrel. And I hated her. She was ugly on the outside, ugly on the inside. And what happened was, I look back and tell myself, I wish I could have just pushed that fat cunt down the stairs. She was the most she would have sex parties downstairs, blowjob parties. She would invite all of her male friends over and suck all their dicks, and she would play loud music. She played Bonnie Raitt's Luck of the Draw album. That's the album that had her big hit, Something to Talk About. And she would also play the Bodyguard soundtrack from Whitney Houston. And I'm like, when Whitney died, I actually cheered. And I know that she was one of the most celebrated pop stars of all time. And I Will Always Love You probably sold a bajillion copies, and Whitney was looked at as a woman of immense talent. But the problem was, Susan made me hate her to the point that I wanted. So this is the story. I have a coworker at my shop who is gay. He's gay married and all, and so he actually wears a Whitney Houston t-shirt to work on occasion. And I have, it's like, I wish I could get a t-shirt made of Whitney Houston lying in her coffin. And yeah, somebody actually went into the funeral home where Whitney was at and took a picture of her casket. And they sold the picture to the tabloids. And what happened was, I was thinking I could find that picture, and under it I could say I should make it into like an inspirational poster that says, cocaine, it's one hell of a drug, or crack, it doesn't do a body good. Yeah. I am just not a Whitney Houston fan. Sorry, not sorry. I don't give a flying fuck what people think, what I'm saying. And anyway, getting back to the rest of the story about Susan. So there were some good things about me living at Susan's. One was that I now lived in Elk Rapids. I could just walk to get whatever I wanted. If I wanted a bottle of pop, the store was around the corner. If I wanted to get a comic book, the store was around the corner. If I wanted to read today's newspaper, the store was around the corner. Hell, if I wanted to go to the movies, the theater was a few blocks away. Even though Joe was a few weeks late on movies back in the day, but he only had one screen. So, but not only that, my mom also took our VCR and my Super Nintendo. So anyway, my mom and dad agreed to a 2-week split between her and Dad. And when I went to Dad's house, I had nothing. Hell, I didn't even have my bike at my dad's anymore. I couldn't just ride my bike over to a friend's house anymore. And there was no cable. Mom had cable, but Dad did not. We only had 4 channels, no VCR, just a Betamax. And just an old Nintendo. I just felt so uncool being with Dad, but with Mom, I had my problems too at Susan's. I had to change my bus stop twice because there was a kid who had bullied and harassed me. Anyway, it's just sad how my life has always been. But my dad had to work hard to try to become the cool parent. And, he would take me to the mall. He would take me to movies. And then it happened. So what happened was I was going through puberty. Now at Susan's house, so apparently, one of the channels that came in, so apparently the place had Cinemax, or as they called it back then, Skinemax, because they would show these late night softcore films. And it was like, if there was a movie, most of the movies were just tits and ass, but occasionally they would show a movie that had Bush in it. And it was like, I remembered the very first time I saw myself ejaculate. It was because there was this really sexy movie where a guy looked like he was diving into a girl's snatch. And I'm like, oh my God, I am a man now. And anyway, so one day I was I was at my dad's house, and we went to the mall, and we took a walk over to B. Dalton bookstore. Now, in the 90s, your mall either had a B. Dalton or a Walden Books. Walden Books in Traverse City was at Cherryland Mall. B. Dalton was at Grand Traverse Mall, because B. Dalton was owned by the same company that owned Hudson's and Target. So anyway, I mean, any viewer of Reading Rainbow probably knew that. Yeah, the Hudson Dayton Corporation, or Dayton Hudson Corporation was a huge sponsor of that show. Yeah, Leechmere and Dayton's, yeah. Man, I love that show growing up. LeVar Burton. Butterfly in the Sky. I Can Go Twice as High. Take a look, it's in a book. Reading Rainbow. Yeah. I Can Go Anywhere. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I better stop reciting the lyrics or else I'll get sued. So what happened was so my dad took me to B. Dalton. I think I got the latest issue of Mad magazine, but Dad got Playboy. And when we got home, my dad showed me the centerfold of that month. It was the issue, by the way, that featured that Israeli chick named Carol Shaya. She was the woman who was a New York City cop and got fired because she posed nude for Playboy. They all said, she's a disgrace to the organization, yada, yada, yada. And it's like, I don't give a fuck. If a hot chick slapped the cuffs on me, it would be very sexy. But I don't want it. Yeah, you're under arrest, bad boy. So what happened was, I remembered him showing me the centerfold that month. It was a chick from Colombia named Maria Checa. And here she was, totally buck-ass naked. And I'm like, my dad gave me a safe space to be a teenager into hot chicks. And Playboy magazine was kind of on a rebound, too. So the story kind of goes like this. Playboy magazine, the religious right in the 80s all tried to shut Hugh Hefner down. And then then people found out that these cucks were all pretty much the same guy. They were crooks. They were rapists. They held giant, terrible secrets. And I think what really helped Playboy's popularity to rebound ever so slightly in the 90s was, that's where that's where people like Pamela Anderson and Jenny McCarthy all got naked in. And it's like, hallelujah. And they would always show issues with some of the pictures that didn't make the final cut, and the good news was my father bought me several Playboys on the condition that I never told my mom, and that I would, just keep the Playboys there. Because if my mom caught me reading Playboy or looking at naked girls, she would get pissy. But sadly, the gravy train came to an end. So the story was, my mom... So the long story short was that my dad was told by a co-worker of his that she actually, she fessed up to seeing my mom performing oral sex on one of the customers at the Shell station. So what happened was my dad got really mad that here she was lying to both me and him. And it really broke him. And what happened was, my dad told me. So anyway, what happened was, my dad confronted my mom. And my mom told him, well, now you know. And it really broke him. And so anyway, my dad, here my mom was with a brand new boyfriend, and my dad was trying to tell me to persuade her to stop and knock it off with dating this guy because he was a homewrecker. My mom, but the truth of the matter was, when I was with my dad, my mom would go out on dates with the guy, and eventually he announced that they were going to get married. And anyway, which is why I ended up living with my dad full time. I wanted nothing to do with my ex-stepdad. And, long story short, my stepdad would eventually bankrupt my mom, started a business that never got off the ground, and one bad decision after another. And so my mom, anyway, long story short, one day on his bus route, my dad, there was 3 new kids on the bus. The kids were from Chicago, and they grew up, and the kids were all from a very wealthy home. And the father was there to pick up the kids, and he was like, and my dad introduced himself to the other guy, and he said, well, New Hope Church in Williamsburg has an awesome singles program. And, so I've told you the story multiple times about New Hope. I'll try to condense everything. My dad met a woman at New Hope, and she cheated on him. They were very controlling about what he could do while he was with the group. I mean, if there were people dancing, they were not allowed to dance because it wasn't New Hope music. Yeah, even though the Bible says there's a time to dance, and it was a time to dance. And then there was, my dad was in a good relationship for a little bit with one of the girls at the church, and she ended up cheating on him. And of course, I was a part of the youth group. Things were cool and groovy in the beginning, and then, I told you the story about the youth group. It was run by John Clark, and John and his wife, they were all telling us no sex before marriage. Don't even think about sex. If you watch an R-rated movie and somebody gets naked, walk out of the movie. Yada yada yada. So what happened was, John, and not only that, they would throw us into small groups. They would basically they would ask us, okay, so how often do you think about sex? How often do you watch it? Blah, 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 blah. And one of the people in the small group was one of my bullies at school, and he was the pastor's nephew. And it's like, Elk Rapids is a town where there's skeletons and skeletons by the dozen. And I didn't want to talk. I actually wanted to get out of there and get the fuck out of New Hope. And finally it happened. My dad, so the story was that my father had so the church wanted us to give them $1.7 million to build onto the church. And my dad said, this is a guy, Pastor Stanfest is somebody who wants nothing but money and power. I mean, and there were two people in town who sold their businesses for him. And yeah, he was, and what was funny was that after he got his wish and got the bigger church, I mean, this is total Donald Trump bullshit right there. Trump wanted everybody to pitch in and build his little ballroom and, paint his, the reflecting pool and blah, blah, blah. And here we are paying $4 gasoline. We're broke as a joke. We're paying more for groceries. We're paying more for this, that, and everything else. And on top of that, back to John Clark, as I mentioned, he committed suicide. He started his own church, West Side Community Church in Traverse City on the west side of town, hence the name. And as the church got big, John started taking more money from the church to aid his luxurious lifestyle. And John, took $500,000. He was caught. And what ended up happening was he committed suicide, blew his brains out. And I'm like, this asshole was out there telling us porn is bad for you. No sex until marriage. That's what it says in the Bible. And this cocksucker blows his brains out. He is a loser, folks. He was a loser. And, thankfully, we left New Hope. We tried another church, Elk Rapids Baptist Church in Elk Rapids. Gary Gladfelter was the reverend. And his sermon on the day we went was about, once again, porn is bad. No sex until marriage. Porn is horrible. And the guy ends up dying of COVID because, he's a COVID denier. And we hopped from church to church to church, and we came to the conclusion Christianity isn't for us. Christianity is it's basically the idea of man telling you how to live your life. And, my dad was right by buying me all these Playboys, because I want to tell you a little story. When I was going to New Hope, I was thinking to myself, here this asshole talking about Playboy. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he ever really talked about Playboy. He did talk about Hustler and Penthouse and what was that movie, Showgirls. Yeah. That NC-17 rated film. It was a colossal failure at the box office and one of the worst movies of the 90s. And, what was sad is that, basically what I've learned in life is that thinking about sex is normal. And that the truth is that one of the most re-edited books of all time is the Bible. Man has made Christianity all about man controlling other people. And usually what it means is you got to remember who gives money to these cucks. Poor people. Because when I was in high school, I went to, my mom, here's the story. None of the girls in Elk Rapids wanted to date me. I would go to a school dance, and here I am sitting there during slow dances and not feeling all that important. And you know what? And I told you what happened. My mom heard about it, and she said, son, you need to date a fat girl. And she basically introduced me to one of her co-workers' stepdaughters. And she was a disgusting, fat, trailer park trash loser who, never really... she used me the whole time. And basically... she was just as bad as Susan and Wendy. And long story short, she was, you know, she had me go to her church on a Saturday night, and it was a trashy Pentecostal church, and they were yelling and screaming and talking in tongues. There was some bad country music being played there. I was ready to walk out. And, my mom, I was scared that my mom she would complain to my mom about me, and, my mom would have a little chat with me that I'm the bad guy in all this. But guess what? I'm not. Because, when you're an adult, you can make your own decisions. Surprise, surprise. And I was now an adult. After so many years of my mother telling me that that ugly pig in the corner is going to be your girlfriend, and it puts her, and it makes her as bad as all the bullies I had to grow up with, who laughed and made fun of me by taking my yearbook and writing C+W in there with little hearts and arrows, and yeah. But you see, this is exactly why I applauded when I was a little. So this is the story. When I was a teenager, one of my favorite singers was Marilyn Manson. Behind my dad's back, because he was holier than thou at the time, I bought Antichrist Superstar. And it was, that album for me was a game changer. It was, Marilyn Manson was one of the most outspoken rock stars of his day. And, so years ago in my local newspaper, the Traverse City Record Eagle, they had a columnist named Cal Thomas, right-wing Jesus freak asshole. And he wrote some scathing article about Marilyn Manson. There was a guy who actually wrote to the Record Eagle saying that Cal Thomas is a piece of shit human being, and that he needs to realize that he is in the same boat with people like Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, Jimmy Swaggart, and all the Catholics, priests who rape children. And that's what it boils down to. All these people are saying, well, the bad guy is the good guy, and the good guy is the bad guy. That's what it kind of boils down to. They want to be the good guys. And Marilyn Manson, you should never buy his music. And that you should listen to, like, Sandy Patty instead. And, the sad truth is, yes, they've tried to pander Christian rock music to my generation. With bands like P.O.D. and Skillet. And, Skillet, their lead singer is an asshole. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I remembered him bashing Cardi B because of her song, Wet Ass Pussy. Because that song went to number 1. Well, Skillet is one of those bands, that doesn't really go up the high of the rock charts. And it's because their music sounds so fake, I don't even get it. And, what the sad truth is, that guy is right. Because I've met a lot of wonderful people who get pigeonholed by the religious right. And, and what's even worse is the fact that, my mother many years ago had me go back to church so I can make her happy and get baptized. So I went to the most liberal church I could find in Grand Rapids, and even they were fucked up. The church's pastor turned out was a butt buddy to Mayor Hartwell, George Hartwell. And George Hartwell was one of the people who got the strip club banned in Grand Rapids enacted. he agreed with Rosalind Bliss and the DeVos family that, we got to get rid of all the strip clubs. And what's sad is that this morning I was on Reddit, and somebody said, is there a club in Grand Rapids where a straight white male can go to? And I'm sorry to say it, but I told you the sad story with Mulligan's many years ago. There was a black guy there named Eddie Johnson, and Eddie had me come over to his house, and he tried to push me to have sex with him, even whipping his dick out and jerking off in front of me. I said, okay, I'm out of here. You are an asshole. So the long story short was that but it was also that, this church wanted me to be friends with this asshole who wanted to give him money and rides, and I kept telling him to fuck off, and finally I had to take, and it's like I had to cut the church off. And I've been to a few other churches because of my mom. We went to this one church together here in Grand Rapids. Trying to remember the name. And this church, unfortunately, was the church that made headlines because they gave away an AR-15 in a raffle. And not only that, but they also it turned out that one of their youth pastors was a child molester. And then we went to another church. I'm trying to remember its name. But yeah, it was on it was on Kalamazoo Avenue here in Grand Rapids. And it turns out, Encounter. New Chapel is the one church. There we go. And Encounter was the other. And it turns out that Encounter is owned by the Dutch reformists. And I'm like, okay, this is not my type of church. I'm sorry. But then again, it breaks my heart that people want to take me by the hand and get me into a world of problems. And those people unfortunately include my parents, who want me to, and of course now, sadly, my dad wants me to like Trump, like he does. And, this morning I had him watch Meet the Press with Chris Van Hollen. He was the guest. And he was talking about how Trump is leading us down the wrong path with high gas prices. And, he promised low gas prices. Well, instead he threw us into a war. And the more I heard Chris Van Hollen speak, I'm like, this guy, they were mentioning this guy should be the Senate Majority Leader when the Senate goes back to being blue this fall. And I agree. He sounds more human than Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer. Yeah, fuck Chuck Schumer. But anyway, I want to tell you a little story. But anyway, the reason why I'm telling you all this right now is I am not a fan of church. And this is why here I am at this nice little park here in Grand Rapids, walking my dog, getting some light cardio in. I've only walked 1,700 steps, 1,800 steps. It feels like a lot more. Well, anyway, so here's the story. So this this past week, it was revealed that Hugh Hefner, that's right, the man, the legend, Hugh Hefner, turned out to be a very stand-up guy. And it says here, in August 2026, newly surfaced court records revealed that Playboy founder Hugh Hefner repeatedly contacted the FBI in 2005 to report Jeffery Epstein for sexual abuse and human trafficking. According to an amended federal lawsuit filed by a group of Epstein survivors against the U.S. government, former Playboy playmate Audra Lynn Christensen turned to Hefner for help while living at the Playboy mansion. Christensen, who alleges that she was raped and trafficked by Epstein and co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell over a period of years, believed Hefner's high profile and law enforcement connections could force the FBI to take her claim seriously. Christensen told Hefner about the abuse in 2005. Hefner reportedly called the FBI multiple times on her behalf to report Epstein. Despite the outreach, the FBI allegedly failed to follow up with Christensen for roughly 15 years. Federal agents finally contacted her in October 2020, more than a year after Epstein died in prison and 3 years after Hefner's death. Christensen's account is now part of a broader negligence lawsuit brought in by dozens of survivors under the Federal Tort Claims Act. The lawsuit alleges that the FBI repeatedly ignored credible warnings about Epstein's operations dating as far back as 1996. Legal experts and former agents note that the FBI was heavily prioritized toward post-9/11 counterterrorism and public corruption in 2005. The failure to act on these trafficking allegations represents a massive systemic breakdown. The disclosure adds a new dimension to the public record, proving that high-profile figures were attempting to sound the alarm on Epstein years before his 2008 Florida conviction and subsequent 2019 federal arrest. Yeah. So, it was true. You know, it's so sad that for years the religious right tried to shut down Hef. You know, they wanted his magazines off the shelf. They wanted him to, you know, find Jesus apparently. And, you know, the truth of the matter was that Hugh Hefner was a better human being than a lot of these preachers and religious nuts who all stand for Trump, even after the fact that he refused to reveal anything about Epstein. You know, he was, you know, by federal law, he was supposed to, all the Epstein files were supposed to be released by now. But instead, he gets us into war. He gets us into high gas prices, inflation. All of it, you know, it's all about the ballroom. It's all about, you know, what he felt was a corrupt 2020. The fact that he still believes that he won the 2020 election and that he was the most best president of all time. And the tragic truth is, guess who got this asshole elected? The same assholes who wanted to shut down Playboy in the 80s, the religious right. Ditto with Howard Stern. They hate them both. Howard Stern is corrupting the minds of our children. I got news for you. I would rather go to a strip club than to go or read a porno mag than to go to a church and hang out with a bunch of losers who want money and rides from me. And not only that, you know, I went to, I should have mentioned this too. Another reason why I quit the liberal church here in town was because, I think there were a couple of sexual predators in there too. Yeah, one of them decided to post pictures of naked men on my Facebook account. And I just simply blocked him from my life. But if he ever talks to me again, it's going to be really nasty. I'm sorry, but, you know, I am not gay. I respect the LGBTQ community, but when they start hitting on me, when they start shaking their dick in my face, you know, yes, I have half a mind to want to call them a stupid F word, and you know what that F word is. Because Grand Rapids women don't give a shit about me. They look at average-looking guys like me, and they don't give a flying fuck. Hell, there was hardly any women that talked to me at both the music festivals I went to this year. I went to Breakaway and I went to Upheaval, and hardly anybody talked to me. Hell, at Breakaway, I remembered, there was an asshole. There was a dude who probably was on his 10th White Claw, and he put his fucking arm around me. It's like, get away from me, man. Dude. Oh, ay vey. And no, I'm not Jewish. Hugh Hefner did a lot of wonderful things in his life. When it was revealed that Bill Cosby had used the Playboy Mansion to drug and rape a 16-year-old girl back in the 70s. Yeah, there was a wild party at the Playboy Mansion. Hefner lied that this girl was 18. Guards let the girl in. Cosby took her to a room, drugged her up, raped her. So not only is Bill Cosby a rapist, he's a fucking pedophile. And so this is what happened. When all the allegations about Cosby were being made, Hef put the foot down. Cosby is not to come anywhere near the Playboy Mansion. Bravo. And there was also the discussion about his son. So Hugh Hefner had a son who beat up one of the Playboy models. He had two sons with Kimberly. And of course, Cooper now runs the Playboy empire. Because the other kid, turned out he had mental problems and beat up this one playmate many years ago. And so Hefner basically said, okay, I'm mad at you. So I'm thinking he had, because of this, Hefner really wanted nothing to do with him. I don't blame him. Hefner was otherwise a great dad to his children. Hell, remember, he had a daughter, Christy Hefner, who helped to run his empire for many years. And the point is, Hugh Hefner was an American patriot. And so were other people like Larry Flint. And Flint, you gotta remember, he lost his ability to walk because some idiot shot him. And allegedly the man who shot him was mad at him because he published a photo of a white man having sex with a black woman back in the 70s. And it's like, the guy was a total frickin' redneck. The point is, folks, is that I'm tired of seeing the good guy be the bad guy and the bad guy be the good guy. And I don't like it when people go out there and say that you're going to hell because you look at porn. And I'm going to tell you this right now. I've met more friends at a strip club than I've met in church. And, I walked not once in all my years of going to strip clubs there have been a woman begging me for a ride or anything. The point is, folks, is that, Jesus hung out with prostitutes. And the mega churches don't want to talk about that. Instead, they want to tell you no sex before marriage, no porn, no this, no fun. And, what's even more despicable is that, the right wing and centralist Democrats are my biatch of the day for this reason. So the New York Times this past week published an article about the fact that Gen Z has decided that they want to remain celibate. Lots of people who are members of Gen Z, they are not having sex before marriage, and they don't want to get married at all. I even had a discussion about this recently with one of my cousins, and she was the first woman in the family to have children. And now her kids are in their early 20s, and she said that her daughter doesn't want to be in a relationship, and she may never get married. And, and her daughter is very beautiful, nice, beautiful looking woman, and it is sad. It's like, why are so many people remaining chaste all of a sudden? Well, there's multiple factors. Factor number one is the fact that, sex isn't as mainstream as it once was. It's been pretty much relegated to the internet and internet only. I mean, yes, it's hard I understand that it can be a little bit hard to monetize sex. But once upon a time, like I said, HBO had all these docu-series about sex, like Real Sex and G-string divas way back in the day. And then there was all these movies on Skinamax that had all the nudity, like I said. But what would also happen is there was also the fact that so the story kind of goes like this. Sometimes the movies they would show on Cinemax were all porno films, but they were, the studios behind these movies would release a special, like a special softcore edit for Cinemax. I mean, they were still having hardcore sex, but they were, but they toned it down. I mean, they even probably shot extra scenes where they're just pretending to have sex. But they did it simply to make the censors happy. I even heard a rumor that on the show Girls on HBO, they actually wanted to do put in a scene where a guy actually ejaculates. To show a man ejaculating. But here's what happened. HBO thumbed down the scene due to the fact that put the thumbs down to the scene due to the fact that they were afraid that the FCC was going to shut them down. And I'm like, well, this is cable. But then again, there's also that, it's like on mainstream TV, there's that discussion about, can you show this or not? But then there's also, can you show this or not in terms of, HBO and Cinemax and Showtime and I'm pretty sure Netflix, if they wanted to, could show porn. But, I know that they had a few NC-17 films, like the one about Marilyn Monroe. And the movie got NC-17 because there was a scene where it was a very realistic scene of oral sex. Of course, then again, there's a reason why mainstream films don't have real sex, and it's because it's a union thing. It's a SAG-AFTRA rule. You can't have real sex on screen. As a matter of fact, if there's a steamy sex scene, the actors and actresses must wear special garments on their genitalia. I mean, they can pretend to have sex, but they can't have sex in real life. But the point is, folks, is that in recent years, HBO and Cinemax has shown less sex shows. They stopped doing the sex shows. And even Cinemax has cut back on the softcore films. And the ratings have gone down. for a reason. Way down. It's because people, and the problem is that corporate America wants nothing to do with sex. And because a lot of these corporate schmucks, they're also hardcore Republicans and religious freaks. John Malone is another person worth mentioning. He's, he was one of the guys behind Warner Brothers. And the sad truth is he might have played a role as to why Cinemax doesn't show those types of movies hardly anymore. And, and of course, print media, they've cut way back on everything. And I can understand part of it's the internet too. It's easier to show porn on the internet than it is in real life. But let's not forget that when I was a kid in the 90s, ABC had the show NYPD Blue. And some stations, yes, they took the show off the air, because, including WZZM 13 here in Grand Rapids. Of course, WZZM had always been a kind of a shitty station anyway. And it was all because of complaints from groups like the American Decency Association. But here's the thing. All these decency groups like the ADA, here's the thing. They're all going out of business, or what's left of them. And part of the reason why is because, look, you cannot get rid of porn. Okay? Porn will live on no matter what. But then again, now they're trying to go after internet porn. And some states have done a yeoman's job of trying to curb that, like Texas. And look at what's going on with the guy who created that law. It was Ken Paxton. And Ken Paxton, he's an asshole. He's an adulterer. He's a crook. He took a $1,000 pen from somebody. He has 15 houses. I mean, it goes on and on. The guy calls himself a man of faith, and it's like dude, what the fuck is wrong with you, man? But yes, people are just, I think the problem itself is money. People, it's like nowadays, once you graduate high school or college, it's feast or famine. And I know how it feels because I've been there. I know how it feels to have catastrophic credit card debt because I had a boss who didn't want to give us a raise. Just excuses for many, many years. And, he almost bankrupted our company. I mean, the 2000s were a decade loaded with lots of bad bosses and lots of control freaks. It just goes on and on. And, my boss would brag about his vacations. He would brag about our company making money. And here we are thinking, when's our next raise? The point is, this is what's led to Gen Z saying no to sex and no to relationships. And, we've come to the conclusion also that people suck. People suck. Yes, we're racist. Yes, we're homophobic. We're prejudiced. And it's not just against blacks. It's not against Jews. It's not against the LGBTQ community. It's against everybody. Everybody sucks. Which is why, nowadays, if I go on a dating site, that person I chat with ends up just being a pen pal. To hell with going on a date. Hell, I even talked with a girl recently. Get this, I went on my first date in 2 years. And it was a girl who was 49 years old. She was 4 years older than I am. What's funny is that this is a woman who dyes her hair purple, and yet, she dyed her, you can tell that she didn't dye her hair recently because her roots are showing. She had gray hair. And, I mean, she seemed to be a nice gal, but it sounded like she didn't want to see me anymore. And that she was going to hang out with her friends at the bar on Saturday night, doing bar trivia. I even asked, can I join you? And she says, I want to get to know you first. So now it's like, I agree. I've met a lot of assholes in my life. And it breaks my heart that I look at my dad. My dad is not the sharpest tool in the shed. And when I was a kid, he actually took me to a specialist because he felt that I wasn't doing enough to be sociable. But the real truth was, it was his fault because I've met way too many assholes in my life who want to hurt me and bully me. And, it's true. We always look at the bad in people. And as a result, this is why a lot of us these days, we've given up. We've given up as a society, and it's not just Gen Z, it's millennials and even Gen Xers. I consider myself a zillennial, which is not necessarily Gen X, but not necessarily millennial either. I would rather listen to alternative music from the 90s and even 80s than to listen to, the Backstreet Boys or NSYNC. Yeah. Backstreet Boys and NSYNC and Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, they basically all turned the girls my age back in the 1990s into little girls again. And it sucks. But you see, folks, what I'm trying to say here is, this is why, once again, we need a blue tsunami. Not just a blue wave, a blue tsunami. And we need to vote for the most progressive candidates out there. I am happy for Abdul al-Sayed. He will fight against Trump's bullshit when he's elected. I mean, he's a good family man. He's happily married with children. Good for him. He, from the sounds of things, it's like they love to trash his mom. So from the sounds of things, Abdul really didn't have a great relationship with his mom, but it was primarily raised by his step-grandparents who appear in all these commercials. And it turns out, his grandparents seem to be very good stand-up people. And I just hope that our future will improve to the point where we can just say, sometimes it's nice to have a +1 or a +2. And I know it's kind of sad when I see people out there with, boyfriend and girlfriend holding hand in hand, and it's kind of tough that, here in Grand Rapids, it seems that this city is just horrible when it comes to meeting people. And that person you end up meeting, I've met way too many assholes in my life. And it's like, once my dad dies, I'm probably going to hold a sign at my door that says, roommate wanted, must be a female, under my age, and no kids, no fat chicks. Oh, man. I could go on and on, but I just hope for a better future, so that way, but then again, yes, I agree, this world is overpopulated with too many losers too, and I think it's our job, if we ever become parents, to teach kids right or wrong. And if you can't do that, then you have failed. And it's just, this world relies on us to make the right decisions and just be a good role model for other people. And And that's exactly why I loved Hugh Hefner. And I'm glad that, his son is taking good care of Playboy. Let's remember what one of Hugh's worst decisions was, and that was making Playboy a nudity-free magazine. And their numbers went through the shitter as a result. Well, guess what happened? They brought his son back, and he brought back the nudity. And, for a while they were digital only. Now they're back to being print publication. And all I have to say about that is, it's time to understand that sex can be a good thing. Protection is a good thing also. And, don't be afraid to share yourself with other people sometimes. I try, it's sad that, that some people out there are disgusting when it comes to sex, like my ex-roommate, Susan, and people who think that they can turn a straight man gay, like all these other gay guys I met. Come. Yeah, there's a car coming, and my dog just decided to stand in the way. So anyway, I think I better get going. But something to think about. Let's try to do what's best for our future. Vote blue this November. And vote for the bluest blue. Don't just vote for... And we're winning. Folks, the progressives are winning. The progressives will win. Knock it off with this, vote blue no matter who crap. We got to vote the most bluest candidates out there. Or else the Democratic Party will be doomed. And the Republicans will win. And fascism will win also. And I understand. Of course, we have the issue of anxiety and depression. And pills and that's the problem. I think, the cure to happiness, at least for a guy like me, is to be with a woman who understands me. Who understands what hell I've been through in my life. But instead, what ends up happening is I end up with my father, who ends up, shoving his mega bullshit in my face and saying that people like AOC and Abdul are all communists. When in fact, they're just channeling FDR. FDR was one of the best presidents ever. We need people who are progressives instead of just milquetoast Democrats who say, remember a few weeks ago on Meet the Press, they had Hakeem Jeffries. He said, I don't want universal health care. Fuck you, asshole. We need universal health care. Nobody should. We're spending countless dollars on war. How about spending money on us for once? Asshole. I am tired of fakes running our world. And when we get fakes, we don't get anything good in society. So let's think about it for a while. All right. Dog and I are going home. So good day and good luck. And I'll talk to you later.